The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory, 1878, as Amelia Vance clutched her 3-month-old daughter to her chest and ran. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face, mingling with sweat as the summer sun beat down mercilessly. Behind her, her father's drunken curses filled the air, each word a knife to her heart. The man who should have protected her was now hunting her like prey, all because she refused to let him sell her baby girl to cover his gambling debts. You ungrateful wretch. Elijah Vance's voice carried across the open terrain. That baby's worth good money to the right folks. Come back here. Amelia's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, the bundle in her arms whimpering softly. Her legs trembled with each step, weakened from months of poor nutrition and the difficult birth that had nearly claimed her life. At 22, she had already endured more suffering than most would in a lifetime, first losing her mother to consumption, then being subjected to her father's increasing cruelty after he turned to whiskey and cards for comfort. The only blessing in her life was little Hannah, born from a brief romance with a traveling salesman who had promised to return, but never did. The baby was all she had in this world, and she would die before letting her father sell her child to strangers who had offered him a substantial sum for an infant they could raise as their own. The distant sound of hoofbeats made Amelia's heart race faster. Her father had mounted his horse. She would never outrun him now, not on foot, not with a baby in her arms. Desperately, she veered toward a cluster of rocks, hoping to find somewhere to hide, somewhere safe. The terrain grew rougher, stones cutting through her worn boots as she stumbled forward. Hannah began to cry more insistently, hungry and frightened by her mother's fear. Amelia tried to soothe her, but panic had taken root too deeply. "SHH, my sweet girl," she whispered. "Please, just a little longer." The hoofbeats grew louder, and Amelia knew she was out of time. With nowhere left to run, she crouched behind a large boulder, pressing her back against the sun-warmed stone as she tried to quiet her breathing. Hannah's cries grew louder, and Amelia felt tears of desperation well up. She couldn't muffle her baby's hunger cries without risking harm. "I hear that brat," her father shouted, his voice unnervingly close. "You're just making this harder on yourself, girl." Just as the sound of boots hitting the ground reached her ears, another set of hoofbeats approached rapidly from the opposite direction. Amelia held her breath, wondering if her father had somehow circled around or if perhaps he'd brought one of his drinking companions to help hunt her down. "That's far enough, Vance." The deep, commanding voice was unfamiliar. Cautiously, Amelia peered around the edge of the boulder. A tall man sat atop a magnificent chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the bright sky. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see the glint of his eyes as he stared down her father. A rifle rested comfortably across his lap, though it wasn't aimed yet. "This ain't your business, Prescott," her father snarled. "That's my daughter and her bastard. They belong to me." "People don't belong to other people," the stranger Prescott replied calmly. "And I don't take kindly to men chasing women and babies with guns." Elijah Vance spat on the ground. "I got buyers waiting. That baby's worth $200 to the right couple. Barren folks from back east willing to pay good money for a healthy white infant. None of your concern." Amelia clutched Hannah tighter, her blood running cold at how casually her father discussed selling her child. The baby's cries had quieted to whimpers, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. $200, you say?" The stranger's voice remained steady as he reached into his saddlebag. Horror washed over Amelia. Was this man considering buying them himself? Her mind raced with new fears as she prepared to run again. Though she knew it was futile to her shock, the stranger pulled out a leather pouch and tossed it to her father, who caught it reflexively. "300, the man called Prescott said firmly, "for both of them." Elijah's eyes widened as he peered into the pouch, greed overtaking his rage. 300, that's right. They're mine now, Prescott declared, his voice carrying to where Amelia hid. "And I'll be taking them with me. You won't be seeing them again." Elijah weighed the pouch in his hand, then grinned maliciously. "Deal. Take the ungrateful wench and her brat. Good riddance to both." Without another word, he mounted his horse and galloped away, not even sparing a final glance for the daughter he had just sold to a stranger. Amelia remained frozen behind the boulder, uncertain whether to flee or face this new threat. Before she could decide, the stranger dismounted and approached slowly, his hands held open at his sides. "Madam, you can come out now. He's gone." Trembling, Amelia stepped out, keeping the boulder partially between them. "Why?" she demanded, her voice hoarse from crying and running. "Why would you buy us?" The man removed his hat, revealing a handsome face with kind eyes the color of a summer sky. Dark hair, slightly damp with sweat, fell across his forehead. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s. "Name's Reed Prescott," he said gently. "And I didn't buy you. I paid him to leave you alone. You don't belong to me or anyone else." Amelia blinked in confusion. "But you said—" "I said what he needed to hear to leave you be," Reed explained. "Some men only understand ownership. I spoke his language." Hannah began to cry again, this time with the unmistakable wail of hunger. Amelia bounced her gently, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "When did you last eat, madam?" Reed asked, his eyes taking in her thin frame and tattered dress. "Yesterday morning," Amelia admitted reluctantly. "And please call me Amelia. After what you just did, madam seems too formal." Reed nodded. "Amelia, then. I've got a camp set up about a mile from here. Food, water, shelter. You and your little one are welcome to it while you figure out your next steps." Suspicion warred with desperate need in Amelia's mind. "Why would you help us? You don't know us." Reed's expression softened. "My mother and sister once needed help and didn't get it. I swore I'd never pass by someone in need." He paused. "I won't harm you, Amelia. You have my word, but I understand if you don't trust me." Hannah's cries grew more insistent, and Amelia knew she had little choice. Her baby needed food, and she needed rest if they were to have any chance of survival. "All right," she said finally, "but I want you to know, Mr. Prescott, that I'm handy with a knife. My father taught me that much before he turned cruel." To her surprise, Reed smiled. "I don't doubt it, and it's just Reed." He helped her onto his horse, then led the animal by the reins, walking alongside rather than mounting behind her, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. Reed's camp was modest but well organized, situated in a small canyon that provided natural shelter from both the elements and prying eyes. A small stream trickled nearby, offering clean water. As promised, he had food, jerky, beans, and even some hardtack that he softened in coffee for Amelia. As she ate, Reed kept a respectful distance, tending to his horse and gathering more firewood. Only when Hannah continued to fuss did he speak. "Your little one's still hungry," he observed. Amelia nodded, tears of frustration welling up. "My milk's been drying up. I haven't had enough to eat myself." The admission shamed her, though she knew it wasn't her fault. Reed rummaged through his saddlebags and produced a small tin of condensed milk. "It's not ideal for a baby, but my sister used this for her youngest when times were hard. If you dilute it with boiled water, it might help." Gratitude overwhelmed Amelia as she prepared the makeshift formula. When Hannah finally began to suckle contentedly from the improvised bottle, a clean glass vial with a piece of soft leather stretched over the opening, Amelia felt the first moment of peace she'd known in months. "Thank you," she whispered, watching her daughter's tiny hands curl and uncurl in satisfaction. "I don't know how to repay you." "No need," Reed replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Where were you headed when I found you?" Amelia's face fell. "Nowhere specific, away." Father's been threatening to sell Hannah for weeks. Today he found a buyer. Reed's jaw tightened. "Your father will likely be back once that money runs out. Do you have family elsewhere, friends who might take you in?" "No," Amelia said softly. "Mother died 4 years ago. We moved here from Missouri afterward, and father kept to himself and the bottle. The only friend I had was Hannah's father, but he was just passing through." She stroked her daughter's cheek. "He promised to return once he settled his business back east, but that was over a year ago." Reed nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm headed to Colorado, silver mining town called Silverdale. My brother owns land there, good grazing for cattle. I aim to start fresh." He hesitated. "You're welcome to travel with me if you like, at least until you figure out somewhere safe to settle." Amelia studied him carefully. Everything about Reed Prescott suggested decency, from the way he kept his distance to how he'd handled her father. Still, she'd been fooled before by kind words and gentle manners. "Why would you burden yourself with a woman and a baby?" she asked bluntly. Reed's lips quirked in a half-smile. "It's a long journey alone. Company would be welcome." His expression grew more serious. "And the truth is, I know what it's like to be alone in this world. No one should have to face that, especially not a child." Something in his tone, a hint of old pain, rang true. Amelia considered her options, which were painfully few. "I accept your offer," she said finally. "But only until Colorado. Then Hannah and I will find our own way." Reed nodded. "Fair enough, we'll leave at first light." The journey north was arduous, but not as terrible as Amelia had feared. Reed proved to be a considerate traveling companion, setting a pace that accommodated her and Hannah's needs. They stopped frequently for the baby, and each night Reed ensured Amelia had a private space to sleep, rigging up a canvas partition in their small camp. As days turned into weeks, Amelia found herself studying Reed when he wasn't looking. The way his strong hands gently handled her daughter, teaching her to grip his finger. The careful consideration he showed in choosing campsites with safety and comfort in mind. The stories he told around the campfire, tales of his childhood in Kentucky, and his years working cattle drives across the vast Western territories. What struck her most was how he never treated Hannah as a burden. When the baby fussed during difficult stretches of the journey, it was often Reed who would take her, securing her safely against his chest while Amelia rested. "You're good with her," Amelia observed one evening as Reed rocked a sleeping Hannah by the fire. He smiled down at the baby. "My sister has 3 little ones. I helped with them when I could." "Your sister is fortunate to have a brother like you." A shadow crossed Reed's face. She died 2 winters ago. Fever took her and her husband both." "The children?" Amelia asked softly. "With my mother in Kentucky." "That's part of why I'm heading to Colorado. Need to make enough to bring them west, give them a proper home." The revelation gave Amelia a new understanding of Reed's kindness toward Hannah. He saw in her baby a reminder of his own family, children he clearly loved but couldn't yet provide for. They were 2 weeks into their journey when disaster struck. A sudden summer storm blew in while they were crossing an exposed stretch of plains. The rain came down in blinding sheets, turning the ground treacherous. "We need shelter." Reed shouted over the howling wind, pulling his horse closer to Amelia's. "There's a line of trees about half a mile ahead. We can wait it out there." They pushed forward, but before they reached the trees, a blinding flash of lightning spooked Amelia's mount. The horse reared, and despite her efforts to hang on, she felt herself slipping from the saddle. Hannah clutched tightly against her chest. She hit the ground hard, managing to twist her body to protect the baby. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand, and she cried out. Reed was at her side instantly, gathering both her and Hannah into his arms and lifting them onto his own horse. He led them to the trees, where he quickly constructed a makeshift shelter using canvas and branches. "Let me see that ankle," he said once they were relatively dry. Amelia winced as he gently examined her injury. "It's not broken," he declared finally, "but it's a bad sprain. You won't be riding for a few days." The storm raged through the night, forcing them to remain in place for 3 days. During that time, Reed hunted, cooked, and cared for both Amelia and Hannah while her ankle healed. He fashioned a sturdy walking stick for her and showed infinite patience as she slowly regained her mobility. It was on the 3rd night, as Hannah slept peacefully and rain pattered softly on their canvas shelter, that something shifted between them. "Why didn't you ever marry?" Amelia asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Reed looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "Almost did once. Lucy was her name, daughter of a rancher I worked for in Texas. What happened? Her father didn't think a hired hand was good enough, offered me money to leave and never contact her again." Reed's voice was matter of fact, without bitterness. "I refused the money but left anyway. She deserved better than a man with nothing to his name." That was noble of you, Amelia said softly. Reed shook his head. It was cowardly. I should have fought harder, proved myself worthy. Instead, I ran. He set the knife down. What about Hannah's father? You said he promised to return. Amelia's cheeks flushed. Thomas was charming, a book salesman with dreams of opening his own shop in Boston. He stayed in our town for 3 weeks, courting me properly with my father's permission. He asked me to marry him before he left, said he'd return in 2 months with a ring. She stroked Hannah's dark curls. By the time I realized I was carrying his child, he was long gone. I wrote to the address he'd given me, but the letters came back unopened. I'm sorry, Reed said simply. Don't be, he gave me Hannah. Amelia smiled down at her daughter, and in a strange way, his abandonment led me here to this moment. Their eyes met across the small space, and Amelia felt something warm unfurl in her chest. For the first time since her mother died, she felt safe, not just physically protected, but emotionally secure in the presence of someone who expected nothing in return for their kindness. As Amelia's ankle healed and they resumed their journey, the dynamic between them shifted subtly. Reed began teaching her to shoot his spare pistol, insisting that every woman should know how to defend herself. Amelia, in turn, shared the herbal knowledge her mother had passed down, pointing out plants good for medicine as they traveled. They developed a comfortable routine, sharing the tasks of making and breaking camp. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking long after Hannah had fallen asleep. Reed spoke of his dreams for the future, a prosperous ranch, a home filled with family, while Amelia confessed her own modest hopes for independence and security. One clear night, as they crossed into Colorado territory, Reed pointed out constellations to her, his arm brushing against hers as he traced the patterns in the sky. My father taught me to navigate by the stars, he explained. Said a man could never truly be lost as long as he could see the night sky. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Reed's voice softened with memory. Died defending our homestead from raiders when I was 16. He saved us all, but at the cost of his own life. Impulsively, Amelia reached out and took his hand. He would be proud of the man you've become. Reed's fingers tightened around hers, and they remained that way, hands clasped together beneath the vast canopy of stars until Hannah's soft cries called Amelia away. The next morning, as they broke camp, Reed seemed unusually quiet. Finally, as they mounted their horses, he spoke. Silverdale's only 3 days' ride from here, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Once we arrive, my brother's place has a small cabin you and Hannah can use while you decide what's next. The reminder of their arrangement that she would continue on her own once they reached their destination sent an unexpected pang through Amelia's heart. Over the weeks of travel, she had come to depend on Reed's steady presence, his quiet strength. The thought of facing the world alone again was more painful than she wanted to admit. That's very generous, she replied, keeping her voice neutral. We won't impose for long. Reed nodded, his expression unreadable as he urged his horse forward. The 3 days passed too quickly. When they crested the final hill and saw Silverdale spread out in the valley below, Amelia felt a curious mix of relief and dread. The town was larger than she'd expected, with a main street lined with businesses and homes radiating outward. In the distance, she could make out scattered ranches and homesteads. My brother's place is there, Reed pointed to a large property to the east of town, where a substantial house stood surrounded by fenced pastures. Robert built it himself when he struck silver 5 years ago, used the money to buy cattle instead of squandering it like most did. It's beautiful, Amelia said honestly, admiring the sturdy construction and the smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. As they approached, a tall man emerged from the house, followed by a slender woman. Reed Prescott looked remarkably like his brother, though his hair was lighter and his build slightly leaner. His wife, Sarah, was a pretty woman with kind eyes who immediately cooed over Hannah. You poor dears must be exhausted, she declared, ushering them inside. The cabin's not ready, yet we weren't expecting you for another week, but you'll stay in the main house tonight. That evening, after a hearty meal and warm baths, Amelia sat in a rocking chair by the fire, Hannah sleeping peacefully in a cradle that Sarah had insisted on bringing down from the attic. The domesticity of the scene, the comfortable home, the family gathered around made her heart ache with longing. "Reed tells us you're quite knowledgeable about medicinal plants," Robert said, breaking into her thoughts. Amelia nodded modestly. "My mother taught me. Nothing fancy, just practical remedies." "We could use someone with those skills in Silverdale," Sarah interjected eagerly. "Our doctor is getting on in years, and he's always complaining that folks don't know how to treat simple ailments themselves." "That's kind of you to say," Amelia replied, "but I couldn't impose on your hospitality indefinitely." "Nonsense," Sarah waved away her protest. "The cabin is just sitting empty, and I'd welcome another woman's company. This territory has too many men and not enough civilizing influences, if you ask me." Reed had remained unusually quiet throughout the conversation, nursing a cup of coffee by the window. Now he stood suddenly. "Think I'll check on the horses before turning in." After he left, an awkward silence fell. Robert and Sarah exchanged looks, and finally, Sarah spoke. "Forgive me for being forward, Amelia, but I have to ask, what are your intentions regarding my brother-in-law?" Startled, Amelia nearly dropped her cup. I don't understand," Robert chuckled. "What my wife means is that Reed has never brought a woman home before, not once in all his wandering years, yet here you are with a baby no less." "It's not like that," Amelia insisted, her cheeks burning. "Reed rescued us from a terrible situation. He's been nothing but honorable." "Of course he has," Sarah said soothingly. "Reed is the most honorable man I know. That's precisely why we're asking. He looks at you and that baby like you're the sun and moon, but he'd never presume to speak of it if he thought you were just passing through." Amelia's heart raced at Sarah's words. Had Reed's feelings changed as hers had? She hadn't dared to hope, assuming his kindness was born of compassion rather than any deeper attachment. "I think," Robert said gently, "you two should talk, truly talk, before you make any decisions about moving on." After Hannah was settled for the night in the guest room, Amelia found herself unable to sleep. Sarah's words kept echoing in her mind, along with the memory of Reed's hand in hers beneath the stars. Wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders, she slipped outside. The night was clear, a blanket of stars illuminating the ranch. Following instinct, she made her way to the barn, where a soft light glowed through the cracks in the door. Inside, she found Reed sitting on a hay bale, cleaning his saddle by lantern light. He looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Amelia, is Hannah all right?" "She's fine, sleeping soundly." Amelia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I needed to speak with you." Reed set aside his work, giving her his full attention. "What about what happens next?" She moved closer, sitting on another bale across from him. "You've been very clear from the beginning that your offer of help was temporary, that once we reached Colorado, Hannah and I would find our own way." Reed nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "That was our agreement." "I've been thinking," Amelia continued, her voice growing steadier, "that perhaps we were hasty in setting those terms." A flicker of something hope crossed Reed's face. "How so?" "When you found us, I was desperate and afraid. I couldn't imagine trusting a man again, not after my father's betrayal and Thomas's abandonment." She met his gaze directly. "But these weeks with you have shown me that there are good men in this world, men who keep their word, men who treat women and children with kindness and respect." Reed sat very still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. "Amelia, your sister-in-law thinks you have feelings for me," she said bluntly. "Is she right?" For a moment, Reed looked like he might deny it, but then his shoulders relaxed and honesty shone in his eyes. "Yes. But I never wanted you to feel obligated or trapped. You came with me for safety, not courtship." "What if I want both?" Amelia asked softly. Reed set the lantern aside and moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "From the moment I saw you protecting that baby with everything you had, I admired your courage. As we traveled together, that admiration grew into something deeper." His voice roughened with emotion. "I love you, Amelia, and I love Hannah as if she were my own. But I have little to offer beyond a share in my brother's land and the promise of hard work." That's more than enough, Amelia whispered, tears blurring her vision. We don't need riches, Reed, just a safe place to call home and someone to share it with. Reed reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. Are you certain? I don't want you to feel this is your only choice. I'm choosing you, Amelia said firmly, not out of necessity or gratitude, but because somewhere between New Mexico and Colorado I fell in love with you. The joy that transformed Reed's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, reverent kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities. When they finally parted, Reed rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this properly, court you the way you deserve, ask for your hand when the time is right. Amelia smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. I'd like that. The next morning at breakfast, Sarah took one look at them and clapped her hands delightedly. Well, it's about time. Robert, pay up, I told you they'd sorted out last night. Robert grumbled good-naturedly as he handed his wife a silver $1. Should have known better than to bet against you. Reed slipped his arm around Amelia's waist. We're taking things slow, but yes, we've decided to see where this leads. To the altar, if there's any sense in either of your heads, Sarah declared, bouncing Hannah on her knee. This little one needs a proper family name. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Amelia stood in the small church in Silverdale, Hannah gurgling happily in Sarah's arms as Reed slipped a simple gold band onto Amelia's finger. The town had welcomed them warmly, especially after Amelia began helping the elderly doctor with his rounds, her knowledge of herbal remedies proving invaluable. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared, beaming at the couple. Mr. Prescott, you may kiss your bride. As Reed pulled her into his arms, Amelia felt the last shadows of her past finally lift. In his embrace was everything she had once thought impossible: safety, respect, and a love that asked for nothing but offered everything. The reception was held at the ranch, where Robert had helped Reed build an addition to the cabin, transforming it into a proper home for their new family. As twilight fell, Amelia found herself standing on the porch, watching Reed twirl Hannah through the air, her daughter's delighted laughter the sweetest music. Sarah joined her, handing her a cup of cider. You look happy. I am, Amelia replied simply. Happier than I ever thought possible. Reed told us he paid your father for you and Hannah, Sarah said quietly. That must have been difficult, Amelia nodded. At first I was horrified. It felt like going from one owner to another. She watched as Reed now showed Hannah to the newest foal in the paddock. But Reed never saw it that way. He paid that money to free us, not to own us. Some men buy flowers or trinkets to show their affection, Sarah mused. My brother-in-law buys freedom, always was an original. Later that night, as they lay together in their new bed, Reed traced lazy patterns on Amelia's bare shoulder. I sent a telegram to Kentucky today, he said. Asked my mother to bring my nieces and nephew out for Christmas. Amelia propped herself up on one elbow, smiling down at her husband. That's wonderful news. This house should be filled with children. Speaking of which, Reed's eyes sparkled with happiness, I was thinking we might want to give Hannah a brother or sister of her own one day, when you're ready. I'd like that very much, Amelia replied, leaning down to kiss him. A whole houseful of little Prescotts. 5 years later, Amelia stood on that same porch, watching her family in the yard below. Hannah, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's kindness, was teaching her 3-year-old brother James how to feed the chickens. Baby Elizabeth slept peacefully in a cradle nearby, just 3 months old and already adored by her siblings. Reed approached from the barn, dusty from a day's work but smiling widely when he caught sight of his wife. Quite a view, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. The best in all of Colorado, Amelia agreed, leaning back against his chest. They had built a good life together. The ranch prospered under Reed and Robert's careful management, and Amelia had become the town's unofficial healer, working alongside the doctor and earning respect for her knowledge and compassion. Reed had formally adopted Hannah on her 3rd birthday, though she had been calling him Papa long before the papers were signed. Any regrets? Reed asked, his breath warm against her ear. Amelia turned in his arms, cupping his beloved face between her palms. Not one. They had come so far from that desperate day in New Mexico, a frightened woman clutching her baby, running from cruelty, and the honorable man who had claimed them as his own not to possess them, but to protect them. What had begun as an act of rescue had blossomed into a love story neither could have imagined. "They're mine," Reed had said that day, the words that had saved them both. Now, surrounded by the family they had built together, those words held a different meaning, one of belonging rather than ownership, of hearts freely given and joyfully received. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in brilliant golds and pinks, Amelia silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought Reed Prescott into their lives that day. In trying to escape a nightmare, she had found a dream beyond anything she could have hoped for, and the man brave enough to make it real.